You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
What if I was to tell you that historically, 25% of all bank robberies in the U.S. take place in the Los Angeles metro area?
Crazy. Crazy.
Yeah, I know. It was crazy for me to discover that too.
I am so glad I get to talk about Quince on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. I have a pair of blue jeans from them that look better, hold up nicer, and fit better than many of those jeans with the brand names that you know about, especially because some of those key brand names just aren't getting it done these days the way they used to. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Still, even with the great inflation, still Quince is getting it done. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/MYHIST for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/myhist. I am pleased to have on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics a listener, Peter Houlahan. Peter, great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. I appreciate it.
How long do you think it's been that you've been listening?
I would say at least 10 years, maybe even more.
Okay.
Yeah, I know you've been on. That's only half your time, but I also go back into your archive, and I'm a Patreon, so I have access to a lot of stuff.
Thank you for that. By the way, good plug too for other people listening. Join the Patreon if you can, and if you're interested, of course.
I think one of the very interesting things about podcasts has been this group of, I know I previously referred to them as amateur historians, and much like yourself. I mean, now you've done it so much that you might not be considered amateur, but
I still put myself in that zone.
But it's been neat. There's the history of Rome and civilizations, and there's a lot of them that just it's just great how fluent you guys are and how passionate you are, and that really comes out. So I'm thrilled to be on with you.
Really appreciate it. This Age of Napoleon is one that I've been listening to. Gray History, French Revolution's another one.
The one that you've cross-pollinated with sometimes the guy from Ohio. That's another great one, because he takes a tight focus, what you'd think, and then, how much it impacts and expands. And you guys have great conversations.
I think Alex from Ohio v. the World is the closest to doing a My History Can Beat Up Your Politics format. Even though it's Ohio focused, and that could be limiting for some audience members, I think what he's managed to show is that Ohio intersects with all American history. There's another one called American Epistles, where she reads letters. The epistles are letters, and she reads letters from them. So those are some of mine. Peter, I understand you are a writer and you have some articles and books.
Yeah, I've got a background in journalism, and my two most recent books happen to involve crimes. And the first one is about the 1980 Norco bank robbery that happened in Riverside, California. And it's 5 heavily armed young men led by a born-again Christian with end times beliefs. And they attempted a takeover bank robbery in Riverside, California. It turned into one of the most violent events in law enforcement history. And, in 1980, it's not remembered that much. I remembered it from when I was a child because I grew up in Southern California. And I just was fascinated by it at the time. And, the toll from it's staggering. There were 3 killed, including 1 deputy. 8 police officers were wounded, 5 civilians, 3 bank robbers were also wounded. There was a helicopter shot down, a police helicopter was shot down. This was a 50-mile running gun battle through the crowded Southern California streets onto a highway where they were throwing fragmentation grenades, homemade fragmentation grenades out on a busy Southern California freeway, and ended up with an ambush 6,500 feet on on a road, a mountain road, fire road up on Mount Baldy. But there were 32 police vehicles that got destroyed and disabled. And the other one is about a traffic stop gone terribly wrong in San Diego, but we're really, which is an incredible story and a real courtroom drama.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about that bank robbery, I didn't get into true crime. I didn't get into writing to do true crime, but there's a lot of impact. That Norco bank robbery was really the gateway event to what is now called the militarization of American police forces. The police were so heavily outgunned. I mean, these guys had the fragmentation grenades. They all had
Mm-hmm.
semi-automatic, high-powered, and you just didn't see it that much on the street. So, and the only reason why I'm detailing it that much, it's called Norco 80. There's my little self-serving pitch.
Do it.
Is because it's on the subject that we're talking about, and it also revolutionized the way that police forces are armed, but also how they deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, because they really didn't. It was barely even recognized at the time, and they implemented a lot of things. Yeah, there's so many police officers involved in this. I mean, but anyhow, yes, that's my writing background, and I wrote an article that I sent to you about a bank robbery epidemic in Los Angeles. I didn't get into, I'm not like passionate about bank robberies, but I researched it in the process of writing a book. And I think it touches on a lot of things, but do you mind if I lead off with a question for you?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. These are very
Yeah.
informal. This is your turn.
I was just wondering, what's your level of interest in crime in America and what it might tell us about a certain era that it takes place? And I don't mean an individual crime. I mean, they generally
Crime.
don't. I mean, there's some, that
Yeah.
that are Scopes monkey trial and things like that, but
No.
it's not a crime, but it's a trial. But anyway, well, I guess it was
Crime
a
in
charged
general.
crime. Yeah, I'm just wondering what you think,
Well,
and I don't.
there's a lot to say there, and the first thing to say is it's such a well-traversed category in podcasting. So, as you know, history is a big one, but true crime is bigger. And so crime podcasting is so big that it's almost scared me out of the market to a certain extent. So I don't do a lot of case stuff. Um, Crime becomes very important, particularly in certain eras, the Depression, the 70s and 80s, talking about these times. How can you talk about like New York City in the 70s and not talk about crime? So like when I do the podcast on the 1976 convention, the first thing I get is a delegate from who drove up from Georgia, and then his first experience is somebody stealing his car. And then we did one a bit when we talked about like Biden and the crime bill, because there was a sort of political attack like on a lot of people who in the 90s voted for that crime bill. And so people who were more, well, first of all, around and a little more aware of politics and stuff in the 90s know that, you know, uh, the crime in the early 90s was very high. And you were saluting senators who voted for bills like that. Now, it had some side effects, like the prisons and stuff like that. And there was some unfortunate language that came out of it. But you would have done anything to reduce the crime during that time. It was such an affront
Yeah.
to people's lives. So I see it in the nexus of policy and politics, and not so much on its own in individual cases. I personally do have a limited amount of interest. There's a podcast I listen to called Best Case, Worst Case, and they get into crime. So, and I tend to like true crime when it's from the police side, like the police catching how they caught the criminals or how they're trying to, versus what I don't like, and I'll get in trouble for saying it, is like when you get sword and scale type, where I think it's almost on the edge of the criminal point of view, and it's like we're
Yeah,
almost like,
and yeah,
you
the
know,
tragedy is entertainment factor.
yeah,
I've kind of stopped listening to true crime podcasts that
hmm
just, their wheelhouse is serial killers, child abductions, people who kill their wives. I mean, it's really, well, number one, wear you out. I mean, even writing, I wrote this book, I've written two books. I'm sort of an accidental true crime writer, and more like literary true crime. And one's a bank robbery and one's a police traffic stop in 1985 in San Diego that ended in a, just senselessly and horrifically violent incident. And then there was a trial afterwards. But yeah, I'm like you. I've kind of shied away from the sword and scales and the other ones. It can wear you out and bring you down too. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to just writing those books and existing in a world where something horrible happened and people died, as with my bank robbery book. So I don't know how much crime tells us, a lot of crime. But as I dug into bank robbery, um, I found out that I think it does tell us a lot about kind of who we are, and it has fluctuated depending on a few different factors. So I wrote a book about the 1980 Norco bank robbery in Riverside County, which is part of the greater Los Angeles metro area. And in the
Hmm.
process, I started researching bank robbery as background in general, and then bank robbery in Los Angeles specifically, and in that era. So what I want to throw out a fact here.
Okay.
and, and a couple quick statistics, and maybe we can use it as a framework. So what if I was to tell you that historically 25% of all bank robberies in the US take place in the Los Angeles metro area?
Crazy.
uh,
Crazy.
yeah, I know. It was crazy for me to discover that too. And between 1985 and 1995, LA metro area had the greatest epidemic of bank robberies the world has ever seen, by far.
I mean, population wise, there's a lot of people, but you're, I think, 5% or something. The US podcast is 300 by 8 or 10 or whatever's in LA County. Yeah, I mean, you're nowhere near 25% with the population. That's
No.
crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, and nowhere in no other crime statistic do they rank number one. I mean, they obviously have a lot of gang violence there and things like that, but
Hmm.
they may rank in the upper part. They may even be, but nothing like that. Nothing. And the causes and the reasons for it are pretty fascinating. But you mentioned the early '90s, and yeah, that's was the 1992 was the worst year of all, and it was 2,641 bank robberies. That's one every 45 minutes of every banking day. In that 10-year period, 85 to 95, there were 17,000 bank robberies. And, bank robberies are handled by the FBI because they're a federal crime for a number of reasons. And that's been since the Depression and the gangster era. But, and when they became federally insured, of course, banks. But there were years during that time that the LA field office of the FBI, which was responsible obviously for the entire metro area, handled more cases in a single year than the next four areas combined of the country. So that's how
Crazy.
far ahead they were. Um, and it really does reflect a number of things about culture and society. And you know, if you look back at bank robberies, you got those eras of bank robberies you mentioned.
Lloyd and
Yeah.
Dillinger and yeah, Infamous America does a lot of those covers all of them. But yeah, there's a number of bank robberies. But of course, in that era, you had cars that might have been faster than what the cops had. Tremendous tremendous need for money,
Yep.
and you had the little guys that the people were sometimes on their side, so they were not really helping the police that much because they were with Dillinger in some cases.
100%, and that really reflects it. And for a bank robber, it's or one of the real contributing factors for the robber. How desperately do you need the money, or how badly do you want the money? Access to the money. Where is it, and how easy is it to get to? And then what are the chances of being caught? And one of the huge things during that, well, like obviously depression. A lot of people needed money, and there was a dislike and disdain for banks. So as
Hmm.
exactly what you said, there's very little sympathy for for banks in those era, and cars and a network of roads that allowed them to hop in a car and get across state lines. And for most of it, there was no interstate communication by law enforcement. I mean, even outside of counties, and obviously no way to transmit, quickly to other law enforcement agencies. And even though the FBI stepped in 1934 because of this, this situation, and passed a few laws that allowed them but it took them a long time to get up and going. So yeah, that's the way it really reflected it. Poverty, cultural
I
attitude
mean, from
towards
a
institutions.
broad, a very broad philosophical underpinning, I always think that public support is always the root of public policy. So even when we talk about crime and we think like, wait, one's the good guys, one's the bad guys, this is very simple. It ain't. And when you lose public support, you'll always have problems in enforcing because in the end, public policy does require that public support. Case in point is prohibition, same time.
Sure.
When there are people who were, say, Republican GOP moderates at the time, I think secretly Cal Coolidge was one of these, who were like, you went too far. And now we can't enforce the laws anymore because people don't respect it. So when you have a situation where people don't like banks, and you're seeing some of this today, well, you're seeing some of this today with police. There's
Mhm.
a dislike of police and things like the George Floyd and everything. It just, you know, and if people don't like court systems and think they're unfair, they then don't participate in the court system. So everything it's a shame. Things shouldn't be a popularity contest, but it is. All public policy is a popularity contest in a sense. And so here,
Sure.
I don't know if it happened so much in the 90s where people hated banks again or whatever. I'm not sure people love banks, but they're probably higher, they probably rate them higher than some other companies like health insurance or other places they get all the hate.
Yeah, the driving factors in that era were a little bit different,
Mm,
but similar areas. But you're right about that as well. There was a lot of upheaval and a lot of one because of the crime and the attitudes towards crime. One other thing about the gangster era, the Depression gangsters, is they really were gangs. Those were
hmm
gangs. You did not see one-on-one robberies that much because banks did try to defend themselves. They couldn't, and they did what is known as the takeover robbery. That's everybody on the floor, and then they go clear out the whole teller line, and then they, and the vault if
hmm
they can get it, and they go out and they come in forcefully. Back in that era, they used to shoot the heck out of people. I mean, there was a lot of, I mean, killing of police officers was just staggering and by those guys. They were not lovable characters, as I'm sure you know. The
No,
machine gun Kellys and the
it's always, yeah, no, and I do think over time, some of the popular, like there might have been like Pretty Boy Floyd or some of these guys who are always saying like I'm the victim here or whatever, and the you see the evolution of the popularity. So after they start killing some innocents, there's less and less of that, and that's where J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI get their ability to do more and the mandate to do more when there starts to be more atrocities and you're thinking about the bank guard's family is really what you got to think about. But yeah, just a lawless time. But when everybody feels they're being robbed by the economy, it's so great. I mean, not just today's little problems that people have or whatever, but I mean, when the economy's been cut in half and there's everything breaks, including the law and order, and there's obviously that connection. But yeah, you think about the
well,
80s and 90s, and I guess it's not the economy bad, but we did have that little recession in 90.
yeah, I, yeah. Also, people look at life is unfair and that they're
Mm,
getting a short end of a deal and things like that. The first era of bank robbery was the Wild West, and
mm,
they say that the first bank robbery is from 1866 when the James Younger gang walked into a bank in Liberty, Missouri. Probably didn't walk into it, but rode up
uh,
to it and stole $60,000 and killed a bystander, and that's considered the first bank robbery in the United States history, which seems a little
ah,
odd. But and now, if you look at that era, once again, that was gangs. They did not. There were not many one-on-one bandits, bank robbers. They were also robbing a lot of other things. There was trains and there were coaches that were transporting money, and there was gold you know, being transported in those era. And we're coming right off the Civil War, where again people are displaced, angry, bitter, and but uh, yeah, just to jump up to the 80s and 90s. The other one is after World War Two is kind of what I call the Dragnet era. And if you listen to the old Dragnet radio shows, you're where they're robbing quite often is markets, car dealerships, appliance stores,
oh,
because it was a society flush with cash. It
mm-hmm.
was a cash economy. People didn't have credit cards. I mean, you have charge cards, but that's so there was a lot of money being passed around, and a grocery store could accumulate a lot of money during a day. And that kind of went out away from the gangs into kind of like the stick up guy. There was a lot of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
individuals or two that would walk in and do that. And they usually did use a gun then. Bank robberies sort of became, the one on one, what they call one-on-one bandits, or later on called note passers. That's one bank robber, one teller. Walk up, and that's where that kind of started, rather than the takeover, everybody on the floor, or we'll blow your brains out type thing.
How
But
much did banks contribute to that? Because I could tell my story about how I was for a very brief time in the early 2000s, I served in a New Jersey uh, town council, 30,000, town of 30,000. And I was police commissioner for a year, which really meant I was just the council person that was liaison to the chief. But I remember him just fuming about banks and he called them robber-friendly policies, where it was like, I understand it's to protect the employee or people not get shot or whatever. And liability from the person getting shot might be as much as they take. So it's, just when they pass a note, just give it to them. Some kind of maybe unwritten policy existed. And we were getting a lot of those in Jersey. Prior to that, uh, police officers in my town, my town had something like a 30-year history of no bank robberies. It's East Coast, of course, a little different and not as not as highway connected. But they used to put the shotguns in the police cars, and my town had
yeah,
them, and they said once they did that, a lot less of trouble in a lot of areas. So yeah, I mean, some of that like passed a note is a lot, making it easier for the criminal, you know.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There was actually one very big thing that banks started to do, but to your point, yeah, it was pretty much written into the business plan because they were rarely violent.
Mm,
If you get into the 70s, where bank robberies start to really kick in and really start to accelerate, one of the things is, you talk about the need for money, drug abuse,
hmm hmm
addiction, and you started to see cocaine enter in. And the 70s were hard drugs. I mean, the 60s was like, recreational. You can almost say,
hmm
even though LSD and stuff are, of course, not a light ride, but you start to see heroin go up, methamphetamine hitting, and then cocaine came in, and then went to high gear in the disco era. And when drug addicts especially heroin and cocaine, when they need money, when they run low on money and they run low on drugs, people truly addicted, they start going out and looking for it. So that was one of the things. The statistics on the number of bank robberies motivated by drug abuse and drug need for money for drugs is pretty staggering. It was up around 75% during the 70s and into the 80s.
It's a lot of
But there was one,
cash. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot of
and
cash.
that's a, and they were rarely violent. They walk up and something they were called
Mm.
call them apology bandits. Sometimes I hate to do this, and because they were bought people driven to this by this need that didn't have criminal streaks at all. And but to your point about the banks, the golden rule in banking in California was don't put your bank next to a freeway because, and so they rarely did. They kept branches out away from freeways. But then the deregulation of the savings and loan deregulation um, in what eight like 81,
Well, initially it was Carter. Initially it was like late 70s, but
yeah.
it really, for the thing we're talking about, the exact thing we're talking about, branches, that was Carter was loosening on that. It's Reagan who loosened up on the behind the scenes type lending and stuff. But yeah, you started seeing the mid 70s, you start seeing that savings and loan boom.
Looking to see what's happening around your home? Ring's battery doorbell helps you track packages and see who's at your door in real time. The Outdoor Cam Plus protects your yard at night with a wide field of view and clearer Retinal 2K video. Or upgrade to 4K cameras and doorbells with Retinal Vision for ultra-clear zoom and detail. Your door, your yard, your home. With Ring, it's protected. Shop cameras, doorbells, and more at ring.com now.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Yeah, and that got very competitive, and there was an explosion in the number of branches. And I like to say what caused this in Southern California, celebrities, cocaine, convenience, and cars, the four C's. And the celebrities and cocaine part is, LA is a very party culture. It's a very kind of star and celebrity culture. And the celebrities and porn stars and models and movie stars were, really flaunting cocaine use. It kind of became a glamour drug, and it really caught on in California. And again, that disco scene, but then into the 80s. And then the market got flooded with cocaine. So the price dropped by like 80%. And so then it became in the reach of the common man, if you will. And even though it was a lot less, it still wasn't cheap,
And it's
and
volume because you're addicted. So it's volume.
And you're addicted, and you can start losing your job, and you can start all kinds of stuff. And so you got a lot more people desperate for quick cash because they're not looking to get rich. They're looking to get the next score and the next, thing.
I will, on the drug use thing, I will say, not trying to get myself in trouble because it's not me I'm talking about anyway, but I was in that Nancy Reagan era. I was like, this stuff's bad. And my mom had me, thankfully, I guess, to the point of like, you touch this once and your life is over kind of thing. But before that, when I talk to people who are a bit older, like, or they're 15 years old or something, I had people that said, look, I was at a party, there was John Belushi there, used to do this tiny little thing with your pinky, just a little bit, like we control it, just like, the thing I'm trying to say is that there was more tolerance of it. It was more normal. It wasn't like this,
No, there was
thing.
the stigma was probably pretty gone. The person you're probably talking about is me. I graduated in high school in 1979, and I can tell you there was no stigma about drugs, and a lot of people were doing them. Not getting a lot of it. People were just casual. A lot of it was just marijuana, which whatever. But it was all around. The stigma was kind of dropped, and there was just a lot of it around in Southern California, and in high school, not a lot of kids could afford cocaine, and the price hadn't dropped. But it just, yeah, there was a very big acceptance of it. And now, I mean, my kids, you get caught, and one, the penalties by the schools are pretty harsh, and you also get a lot of, you know, crap from your friends, like, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
It's I mean,
Different.
I'm not saying it's not out there, but clearly, because we got fentanyl problems and things like that. But anyways, um but yeah, 100%. So I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Los Angeles. Maybe I should say this too. So I know these eras very well, and in addition to writing the book about this specific bank robbery, and I was even a bank teller in 1982 and 1983 and 84 in a Security Pacific Bank in Whittier, California, and
Yep. Oh,
we were
Nixon's old
we
town.
were yeah, we were robbed twice. One
Ah,
person walked in. I looked over, and the teller two down was white as a sheet when her customer left.
ah,
He walked up and said, "I have a bomb in this briefcase, and I'm going to blow all of you up," which is a little sobering. But and then the other one was was just there was a juvenile facility down about a half mile away. This kid got it, just jumped the wall, came over, robbed the bank, went back and jumped the wall.
oh my
so
gosh.
he could say, "Hey, I was in juvie. I didn't do this." But so I'm familiar with the the era and kind of bank security and things like that on a young teller level. But and I'm sorry to have gotten away from your original thing about the banks. California's got such a car culture that convenience is, it's the home of fast food. It's the home of drive-through.
Hmm.
It really is. And that's all about convenience, because you're in a car, you're dragging your kids around. You don't want to get out of the car to go, it just becomes a constant drive, get out of the car, bring the kids in, all kinds of things. So they turned out that convenience is absolute king, and the fast food were the first to figure it out. And what's more convenient than the bottom of a freeway on ramp or a freeway off ramp? And for bank robbers, what's more convenient than a freeway on ramp? And what the savings and loans and the competition and dropping all their security, visible security, they made their branches look like living rooms and things like that. Although posting a guard in your bank had long since gone out, because that rarely went well when you have an armed guard confronting a bank robbery in a brand. You want to get them out, even the takeover. You just want to get them out. You don't want to. So, anyways, but they started moving them closer and closer and closer to freeways, and soon they were putting them very close to freeways, and that was a huge factor. And then the other part is kind of obvious. One, you got cars. You have a lot of legal jurisdictions, or a lot of law enforcement agency jurisdictions. LA is
Hmm.
not one big city. They're all a ton of independent cities. Whittier, Pasadena, Long Beach. There's all, and
That's
they didn't
right.
communicate that well. And you had a network of freeways going through the whole thing, and people probably think, "Wow, I don't want. What if you get on a traffic jam?" Even that, you're moving probably far enough to get, and we're talking the 80s and then into the 90s, where there's still that this technology is not terrific. It's still cameras, and they learned later on. But you rob a bank, you hop in your car, one teller, one bank bandit, hop in your car, jump on a freeway. In 5 minutes, you're in another agency jurisdiction, cruising the side streets of another place that probably hasn't even heard that there's a bank robbery, has no description. And if somebody didn't get your license, or if you parked a cold car, that's a little advanced. You were gone, baby, gone. I mean, and people are desperate for this money, or some people just say, "Geez, this is some easy cash. Why stick up a liquor store?" You can walk up to a teller and get 2,500 to 5,000. You know, that's probably what you're going to walk out with.
In
And
those days.
people in those days, yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
And again, it's still credit cards are becoming a lot more, but it was still
mhm.
a lot of it's cash. People, I remember getting paid, you go to the bank and you put half your paycheck in and take half of it out in cash. I'm back in those days. So
I
but
was
that
I was right on the cusp of that. I still had that where it was, yeah, you gotta, I guess we got a check, but I still, yeah, had to go deposit to deposit some, take out some. Yeah, you see, it's very different. And so on those paydays, they know the bank has a lot. People might have a lot. You can rob them too.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, and they did. But
Please, people
I'll just
listening to this podcast, this is just, we're
okay.
talking historical here. We're not advocating for anything.
Well, the end of this story is how it's become extraordinarily difficult to
Hmm.
rob a bank, as you can imagine now. That's why they are down tremendously. But yeah, you think, oh, well, why couldn't you just rob a bank in Manhattan and blend into the crowd? It's not that easy. And again, all these things converging, a real party, a lot of addiction in there, and disability. It's pretty easy. And because and to your point, yeah, banks were let them get out, give them the money, let them get out.
Let them get out.
And it
And,
was,
yeah, like I said, as police chief, he was like, well, yeah, then it's our job. But East Coast was always different. And like you said, Manhattan, the first thing is, oh, yeah, you should be able to blend in the crowd. Well, that's not somebody who's lived or worked there very long, because in some ways, it's the biggest small town on earth. People notice
yeah,
things like changes. Like, okay, yes, you could blend into a crowd, but if you're running through the streets, even in Manhattan, is going to get some notice,
yeah.
and also they're just more aware. There's a lot of eyes, and
There's a
East
lot of
Coast,
people.
a lot of
You're going to go
people.
through. You're going to
Traffic
go
is
through
a
a lot of
nightmare. You're
people.
not getting anywhere. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of New Jersey too. While there are a number of highways, there are only so many. The big ones are Parkway and Turnpike. And to get really far, there are only so many. So once they get a
Yeah.
sense of which direction you might have went, they kind of know the highway. They're probably going to get you. And,
Yeah.
you had state troopers, and so they had some jurisdiction. So, yeah, I think there's just more disincentive. Um, Now, I don't want to, you tell things on your pace, but I did notice you brought up that North Hollywood incident,
Uh,
and I
um,
really capped that. To me, that's just a crowning incident in this kind of bank robbery spree.
it really is. In fact, the bank robbery spree was kind of on the way down, but these
Mm.
guys were, these are two guys who are bodybuilders.
Hmm.
They were just bad, bad dudes, and they were hanging out at Gold's Gym, and they were obsessed with the movie Heat. And their original robberies were, they would do crazy things. They would get in their van and drive down like Ventura Boulevard, and a Brinks car would be coming the other way, and they'd lean out the window with a semi-automatic and shoot straight into the windshield. And then they go on down, take their van down the street and light it on fire. Well, that's a completely failed thing. You're not going to, it's just a dumb thing. But then they started ambushing Brinks carriers outside banks, literally
Hmm.
shooting them dead in cold blood.
Hmm.
And they were getting away with 200,000, 300,000. They hit the same bank twice. You've seen them. They were heavy body armor.
Heavy.
They were yeah, and yeah, they were like monsters you could see them on the video surveillance
Well, on
camera
the
walking
video,
into that.
I just, yeah, I mean, I remember at the time it was just shocking that these guys have freedom of movement on the scene. And we're not used to that. We're somewhat used to, I think generally used to, when we're seeing a crime on video, particularly back then when there was a lot of video, particularly in Southern California with the chases and stuff. But there wasn't like today's cell phone video. But
Sure, right.
when you saw it, it was always the cops were in control. And these people usually didn't have freedom of movement. They're running. They might be shooting in the back as they're running away. Not these guys. Calm as
Nope.
can be. In fact, my belief is with both of them, even based on the incident you had, that money was only part of it. It was thrill. There were, but at least one of them were probably partially suicidal, and whatever else they were addicted to kind of just doing this. And so blowing apart, like acting like they were the Terminator, was just part of it. And they really were for a few moments there. I keep plugging other podcasts, but like the Infamous America has a minute by minute description of this incident. You just won't believe it. I mean, the whole thing unfolds in like, what was it? Was it an hour? I mean, but during that time, it's a war right on the streets.
Yeah, I mean,
of
that's
Los
a
Angeles.
huge amount of time for it to unfold. Absolutely. The police were completely outgunned. And they even went down to the local sporting goods store and asked
Right.
for the local Big Five sporting goods store. And yeah, no police officers died, but they got hit. They thought they were dying. A lot of them. I interviewed one of them
Amazing.
for this article I wrote, and yeah, one of the police officers, and he said one of the first guy. In fact, I think he's the guy who shot at close range one of the bank robbers. They did things. Those guys did things. You're absolutely right. That just seems suicidal. They would stay in a bank 8 minutes. 10
Mhm.
minutes, that Bank of America, 15 minutes. The golden rule is 2 minutes.
Two
You
minutes.
get in, you get out, and no matter what goes wrong. And if you stay 3 minutes, you've done a dumb thing on a takeover robbery. That on the everybody
Mhm.
down on the floor robbery, and they also think that they would take like phenobarbital or something
That's
before
what
they go
there was some
into
drug usage. They were high on themselves, and because it just had to be more. The money adds to that too, and they needed money, as I understand. But there had to be so
well,
much more there. Yeah.
yeah, they had well over $1 million stored somewhere, and it's never been found. But well, and you remember they both got killed on scene, and the
Yes.
last thing one of them said was "shoot me in the what head," and
Yeah.
to the cops. They were mean guys. The takeover robbery is the FBI's worst nightmare. Those are the most dangerous. Like you go
Hmm.
back to the gangster era, everybody on the floor. So many things can happen. There's usually, of course, there's a lot of weapons around. There's people, nervous and flinchy, and that's the ones that they hate. And there's kind of an interesting story about Los Angeles, and it led directly, takeover robberies led directly to finally banks getting serious about and joining in and helping rather than just writing it into the business plan as a loss. And so there were uh, by the way, there's four different types of robberies. There's the no
Okay.
passer, the one-on-one
Right.
bandit. There's the takeover robbery, and those are the ones that are really concentrating on now. There's also what they call the tunnelers.
Do they go
In other
under?
words, yeah, or through the side or something. They break into the bank when it's closed, and they drill and they pick vaults and all that stuff. They generally call
Okay.
them the tunnelers. And there were a few incredible stories in Los Angeles. These guys used the under Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. They used the sewer system and the storm drain system. They had ATVs they would take in there every day, and these power tools. They tap into the bank's electrical lines, and for a month they chiseled and drilled away in the middle of the night. They even, like, the bank manager said, "Why does my Muzak keep turning off?" It's because they kept cutting into wires and stuff. But anyways, that very few of those, and then the others is the inside job. The inside job is an employee who's it's still a robbery, but it's orchestrated by someone who works there and knows the inner workings. But the
As you
one-on-ones were
probably
not.
know, and I've worked for a bank in the past, but not as a teller, but as a mortgage sales rep. Um,
Sure.
they're not well paid.
Yeah. So
Maybe the
here's kind of like an interesting few tales that lead right up to those
Mhm.
those North Hollywood guys. But in 1991, there was a group called the West Hill Bandits, and these guys were polite, efficient, professional. It was two of them. They'd come in and they'd tell everybody get on the floor, don't move, don't do anything, and just enjoy the show. And they would go in and they would never stay over 2 minutes. And they would, when they'd leave, they'd say, thanks everyone. And they'd be out the door. And they were taking big amounts of money. They hit a few banks, and they were in the valley out in Los Angeles Valley, and they turned out to be some religious whack jobs who the prophets of God, and they said they were battling the Luciferians. So they were stockpiling weapons and everything, and they included their Luciferians as Wells Fargo Bank, the Hershey Chocolate Company, Jane Fonda. So it was and they eventually got caught with tons of weaponry. But one particular robbery, they hit the Wells Fargo in Tarzana, California, and what was important about that is that one of the bank employees let slip the amount of money that was robbed, and that was $437,000, and that was the most in the history of LA at that point. Well, it was a real no-no to tell how much money these people were making. They did not want to advertise that, and sure enough, there was a member of the Crips Street Gang, the Rolling 60s Crips, over the hill in the Flatlands, a guy named he's an OG, as they call it, original gangster, named Casper, and he said, what the hell am I selling crack cocaine on a street corner for, and running that racket, and which another factor, right? Crack cocaine. That amped
Big
everything
factor.
up. But but so within weeks, what Casper was doing is he was taking these young guys, like these are teenage wannabes, just trying to get in the gang. They look up to him, they idolize him, and he was sending them into branches. He'd go down the street and wait in a hotel room, and he would send these young guys armed with a getaway car and then armed, and he was sending them into these banks. Most of them have never stepped in a bank in their lives, and they were shooting through the ceiling. Some of them were barely into their teens. They're announcing themselves with bursts of gunfire. They're pistol whipping customers, pulling wedding rings off.
Oof.
They're terrorizing everyone, and they shot customers, they shot themselves, they shot each other, they shot employees. It was a nightmarish scene, and then they go back to Casper. Takes, let's say they got 20,000, 10,000. He'd give them like $100 each, tell them to go take a hike. And these guys got caught a lot. These kids, they just don't know what the hell they're doing. They make such a show out of it, and then they did have cold cars and things like that. The guy who ran the FBI office, the field office, the LA field office of the FBI, who ran the bank robbery division, was a guy named William Rader, and he wrote a book called Where the Money Is, and it's about he ran that field office, which handled the entire metro area for the entire epidemic, and that book is incredible. Highly recommend it.
That's the old line from one of those old bank robbers.
That's
why I robbed the bank, because that's where the money is.
Bill Rader, the head of the FBI's bank division, he called these indoor muggings. And again, I really recommend his book. Rehder is his last name, and Where the Money Is. It's got a lot of just tales and stories, and a lot of them we've touched on here. But due to Casper, these takeover robberies rocketed. There was only 40 to 60 a year, and suddenly in the last 3 months of 91, the year that the guys let slip the amount of money that could be made, there was 100 bank robberies, and then the next year, 92, there was 448. I'm talking takeover robberies. So they went from 40 a year to 448 in a year and a half. And they went from 4% to 30% of all robberies, and they were extremely dangerous. And that's when banks said, people were start like, I'm not working for a bank. Why would I be a bank teller? Customers were worried about going into banks, and that's when the banks said, now's the time. Plus 1992, when that happened, there were 2,600 heists. That's the one that was one every 45 minutes. So, and the FBI, they had a hard time catching bank robbers, but the only thing that they really counted on was that these guys would do it again and again. Bank robbers don't rob once, so they would start to, but they could not catch Casper or these guys. Casper never stepped in a bank. He was down the street, and he's a clever guy. But
just as a side note, of course, I'm going off the wire or Freakonomics or whatever, that whole drug dealing business or that kind of street crime is the worst pyramid scheme either. The guys on the corners make nothing. So they
Yeah.
make nothing. And it's the bank himself, like Casper, the guys above it all, that take everything.
And right, it fit right into that same template for sure. And so this is how it all ended. This is how it that's this
Mm.
trajectory and how I wrote an article called "The Rise and Fall of the Bank Robbery Capital of the World." Well, this is the fall part when they started to get serious, and part of it you already mentioned. It's when those federal sentencing laws changed,
Mm.
and that was 1979 or 89, but it took a while. And what before that, these federal prisons, because that's where the bank robbers went, like the agent Rader said they were like finishing schools for bank robbers. They'd
Oh.
go in, even if they used a gun, they'd go in there and they come out 3 years, 2 or 3 years later, very much better at what they were doing. So they were seeing the same guys over and over, and they'd go, and they'd rob 20, 30 times before they get caught again. And even, the sentencing was very lax.
Hmm.
And that when they passed that federal sentencing laws, it changed. You got the average was 20 years for a bank robbery, add another 5 if you used a gun, and you had to serve 85% of your sentence before you were eligible for parole. So it took a while, but these big bank robbers started to disappear out of the system. And then California started the three strikes you're out, and that was in 94. So they were starting to clear more off. And as you touched on, there's these things are very problematic in other ways. They scooped up a lot of people for, selling a pound of marijuana who are now doing life in
Hmm.
prison, or yeah, I mean, it was very, so anyways, we know that. But when it came to bank robberies, it started to get them off the streets. The other was technology. There were clearer cameras. There were more of them. There was, later on there would be facial recognition and license plate readers. Not then, but that's what makes robbing a bank almost impossible now in our current surveillance state. Um, and drug use started to crack cocaine started to recede. Just drug abuse in general was not so widespread. Just the raw numbers. I mean, we've got obviously fentanyl problems, things now, but the cocaine was an epidemic of, the crack cocaine was just crazy. And then the cooperation from the banks. They started
Yeah.
getting serious. They started putting more cameras. They started investing in more. They started coordinating, passing information, on giving more information. Um, and the decline was pretty abrupt. And uh, in 1993, so 92 was the worst. In 93, it dropped by a third. And then in mid 93, they caught Casper. And he had done 175 takeover robberies in less than 2 years and never stepped inside a bank once. So he's the king of all bank robbers of all. That's more bank robberies attributed to one human being. And he just got out, by the way. Um,
Oh, better
a
watch.
little, I'll tell you a little sidelight in a second, but and then the three strikes rule by 97, it was down 70%. By 2013, they were only had 212 bank robberies. So that's a big jump in time, I know, but that's 1/10. And then that same year, San Francisco Bay Area surpassed LA for the bank robbery capital. But the FBI used to have during that time, Raiders Group had fax letterhead and mugs that said bank robbery capital of the world. Like some of the federal, I didn't think it was funny, but it was, so that's kind of what took it on and ended it. But yeah, you had this convergence of, the car culture and the coke.
It's fascinating because we take an issue, we take a political issue, we take a trend. There's a tendency like us to take a bank robbery. It's like, oh, well, one way of looking at it is this guy, Casper, and his crews made the individual decisions to rob a bank. But you
Yeah.
also look and see that there are all these overlapping societal features that you can't get away from. And it's like, even if you want to try to be someone who doesn't do that, who's not a namby-pamby relativist or whatever, you can't do a proper analysis without, well, why did it go down so much? Did people just make those individual decisions less? No. I mean, there's all these factors that play into even something that seems like an individual and menacing decision of a person, but there's society, and policy that goes into. I think people will be fascinated by all of this. I really do. This is officially a listener talk episode, but I also think that I could have just interviewed you as a guest. I think the audience will enjoy it a lot. Thank you for coming on, Peter, and thanks for being a listener.
Thank you so much. This has been great.